Hi guys, just finishing up in my kitchen for the day and want to get this pot roast recipe out to you. This is a quick and easy recipe for how to make a pot roast while you're watching football this weekend. Get all your ingredients before the Saturday or Sunday game. Do a little bit of prep work, probably take you about maybe a half hour before the game. And by the time the game is over, you're going to have a beautiful meal and a couple more servings to put in the freezer for later. So let's get started. So we're going to start with slicing your onions. Now you can do this any way you want. You can chop them. I like to get them in wedges because I like onions and I like to have a little bit more of a piece of onion, bigger pieces of onion. So I leave the bottom part connected and just slice them into wedges. You can do it any way you want. And fumes from the onion will cause you to cry, but a really good trick for that is lighting a candle. A candle will burn those fumes off so that they're not going up in your eyes. Next, we're going to peel some garlic and put some garlic in here. This is the first year I was actually successful at growing garlic. Oh, it is so much better than store-bought. Garlic has a tendency to burn very quickly and turn bitter. So I don't like to dice mine. I like to just mash it with my knife. It's much easier to peel and separate the garlic from the peel. All right, going down the list of ingredients. We need some beef broth. I don't have beef broth right now, so I'm using vegetable broth. I love this broth the best. It's very convenient, it's very delicious, and it's very easy to keep in your refrigerator and have it on hand anytime. You just mix a spoonful with a couple of cups of water and you're good to go. You can also see that I have a tube of tomato paste. Instead of buying a can, grab a tube of tomato paste. You can usually find it in the Italian ingredients aisle and keep it in your refrigerator. This is great for adding to lots of things. You can make your own spaghetti sauce. You can just throw a can of tomatoes in, add a little bit of this paste. It'll thicken it up. Put some garlic, some Italian seasonings, and you're good to go with that. Now we're on to our meat. It's a good idea to get as much moisture out of the meat as possible because you're putting this meat into a pan with hot oil, and if you have more moisture in there, you have a tendency to steam the meat instead of get a good brown sear on it. So we're going to put our burner to a little over medium, whatever that is on your stove. We're going to put a couple of tablespoons of olive oil in the bottom of the pan, let it heat up. As you can see, my meat doesn't quite match the size or shape of my pot. So I will need to cut it in pieces, which will mean that it'll cook faster with smaller pieces than it would if I kept the whole piece intact. And while you're cutting the meat into pieces, you could go along the vein lines. I'm just going to cut it in half, or I'm just going to eyeball it to see, how it would fit in there. Before we put the meat in the pan, we're going to season it with salt and pepper. Both sides, pat it into the meat. Be generous with your salt and pepper. Okay, the ingredients are down below. Go through the list, get everything out on the counter so you have everything you need right there. Okay, now we have it in our pan. I've had it in there for about 5 minutes, and you can see there's a nice crispy brown outside. You want to do that so both sides of the meat are brown. It doesn't have to be cooked any more than that outer layer, but you want to get a nice good brown on it. That's where your flavor is going to come from. So we're going to do both pieces, both sides, and then we're going to take it out of the pan and set it aside. Ooh, look at all that goody goodness on the bottom of that pan. All of that brown little droppings from the beef are what bring flavor to the dish. So, oops. And as you can see, I dropped a couple of pieces of garlic in there inadvertently. I did not mean to do that. Be very careful cooking garlic. It can burn quickly, and if it cooks too quickly, even without getting burned, it can turn bitter very quickly. So we're just working on the onions right now. I'm putting the onions in the pan now so that they can absorb some of those flavor tidbits and they can brown a little bit too. It helps to salt the onions a little bit. That will release the moisture in them. And since I have bigger pieces, I'm going to put the lid on the pan and let them cook down a little bit. Again, you just are trying to get the onions to release some of their juices and brown a little bit. You're not trying to cook them. Now that the onions are nice and browned, now I can put my garlic in. And I'm just going to barely warm it up because I don't want it to get to that bitter point. So we're just going to put the garlic in, stir it around a little bit, just so those little pieces get a little bit warm and just start to get coated with the brown drippings. And now we're going to deglaze the pan with red wine. You don't have to use red wine. You can use stock for this too if you prefer that. And I'm using the wooden scraper to scrape off any kind of brown leftovers from the browning of the onions and the meat to get that incorporated into the wine. That's great flavor stuff. And while we're talking about this, you can see the pan is a very heavy pan. You want to make sure that you have a really heavy pan. This pan is, or this pot is really great for all kinds of things. They're a little bit expensive, but I strongly recommend you getting one. The lid actually keeps the moisture in the dish while it's cooking. Now we're adding the beef stock, chicken stock, vegetable stock combination. You need 2 to 3 cups, just enough to cover everything, not so much that it's going to boil out over the top of the pot. But just, this is a Le Creuset pot. I have a link in the description if you would like one of these pots. I've had this one for 20 years. You can see it's a little brown because lately I've been baking bread in it and that dries it out a little bit. It's been a great investment for me. Okay, so we've added our wine, we've added our stock, we've added some tomato paste. See how easy this tomato paste is? We need 2 tablespoons or approximately, just approximate. You don't need to, this is not baking where it has to be all exact measurements. Couple of bay leaves. This is some rosemary, and then we're going to add a little bit of thyme to it. Just eyeball it. You need about a healthy teaspoon. Okay, we're going to give it a quick mix. Then we're going to put our meat back in the pot. We're going to arrange the meat in the pot so that it's covered with all of our liquids. I had to cut another piece because we have onions in there now. We're going to get that back in there. We're going to add even the juices that came out of the meat while it was resting. Put the lid on. It's a nice heavy lid. It'll keep the moisture in the pot. I can't stress enough what a great investment these pots are. Then we're going to put it in the oven at 300 degrees and we're going to cook it for an hour and a half while you're watching the first half of the football game. The next step is to peel your carrots and your potatoes and get them ready for adding them at the halfway point to cooking your meat. Okay, now we're going to cut our potatoes. If you want, you can peel the potatoes. I like to keep the skins on. Actually, it's healthier to keep the skins on, but that's totally a personal preference. I got a 5-pound bag to make this recipe, and we're not going to use 5 pounds. I'm just going to cut out, I think will fit in the pot, which is about 1.5 pounds. We are at the halfway point with the meat. It's been in the oven for a little over an hour now. You can see it's getting nice and brown and just soaking up those juices and bubbling gently. I'm just going to stir it up a little bit, flip over the meat. Now we're going to put the potatoes in. We'll just arrange them and squeeze them in wherever we can get them in the liquid. And then we'll put the carrots in around them. So see, if you would have done those potatoes and carrots before the game started, you could come in here at halftime, pull the pot roast out of the oven, throw the carrots and potatoes back in, give it a stir, just checking the meat for doneness because it depends on your oven and the size of the meat pieces, how quickly it'll get done. But you can see it still doesn't really pull apart very easily. So it has a little bit of time before it's really tender and it falls apart on your fork. Okay, we're going to put it back in the oven for another approximately 1.5 hours. As I was mentioning, I got a 5-pound bag of potatoes for this recipe. There's about 1.5 pounds, maybe 2 pounds in with the pot roast. I've peeled some of these potatoes. I like some skins, but I'm just going to go ahead and make some garlic mashed potatoes. They can be served with the pot roast as an option, or what I'm going to do is make the mashed potatoes and divvy them up into freezer containers so that I can have them to enjoy with another meal at a later date. So I'm going to get my potatoes going. Start with cold water, bring it to a boil. How long that takes to bring them to a boil will depend on the pot you're using and your stove. So that'll vary, but since I'm sitting here, I can just watch and pay attention to it. In the meantime, I like garlicky mashed potatoes, so I'm going to chop the garlic into very teeny tiny pieces, small as I can get. I don't want any of those pieces recognizable in my mashed potatoes. Okay, so I have the garlic diced very, very small. Now I'm going to salt it a little bit and press my knife over it. This releases the juices in the garlic. Set this off to the side for a minute while I get my other ingredients. I don't know if you've ever made mashed potatoes. Very simple ingredients, some butter, some milk, and my addition of the garlic. You never want to put cold milk or cold butter into your hot pan with your cooked potatoes. It'll make your mashed potatoes gooey. You want to warm the butter and the milk before you add it to the cooked potatoes. So we're going to use a little over 1/2 stick of butter. And I'm putting this in a different pan, which means an extra pan to clean up. You can do this in the microwave too. It's just my microwave is not as convenient as having it right here on the stove next to the potatoes. And I put just a little over 1 cup of milk. After they come to a boil, you want to cook them. It usually takes about 15 or 20 minutes for this size of pieces. If you want them to cook faster, just make smaller pieces. My potatoes are done. I've put a fork into them and they're very tender. So I'm going to drain the water from them. I don't use a strainer. I just do it right from the pot with the lid. And then I'm going to mash them. And I'm going to try and get them into fairly small pieces. It's a little harder to mash them without the liquid. You don't have to start mashing them before you put the liquid in. I don't know why I do that. It's just something I've done my whole life. Just a habit. Now that you have them in the smaller pieces, now we're going to add this butter and milk and garlic mixture. The garlic has been infusing the milk mixtures. So we're going to add that all in. You will notice it looks a little soupy at this point, but once you mash it a little bit more, and even if it sits on the stove for 3 to 5 minutes, it'll absorb all that milk and butter and deliciousness. I wish you could smell this. It smells so good. Okay, and now we're going to add a little seasoning, salt and pepper. The chefs would have you use white pepper so that you don't see the black pepper sprinkles throughout your potatoes, but I'm not that particular. I'm just going to use black pepper. If you want to be a little more upscale and gourmet, go ahead and get yourself some white pepper so that you don't see it in your potatoes. Okay, we're going to stir it all up. We're going to distribute it into 3 freezer containers. All right, so now we're ready. The game is over, and it's been another hour, and we're ready to take our pot roast out of the oven. We're testing it for doneness at about the hour mark. It's still not quite as tender as I would like, but the potatoes are done. The carrots aren't quite done either. So I'm going to take the potatoes out and put the rest of it back in the oven. All right, I've given it another half hour. Sure, see that lid, how it captures all that moisture and all the steam that's coming up from the meat and the potatoes and vegetables that are cooking. This looks really good. I'm going to cut off a piece here. You can see I can pull it off with my fork. Oh, that looks good. Yep. Tender and juicy. Okay, now I'm going to put the potatoes back in. I'm going to split it into my taller freezer containers with the same lids. I have 3 meals, and I'm going to enjoy a serving of pot roast tonight myself. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you try a pot roast yourself. Let me know how it turns out. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. If you found this helpful, like, subscribe, and pass it on to somebody else who would like a delicious pot roast. Enjoy, and